Subtext is one of the most powerful approaches, tools you can use in writing. Most of the time, writers are introduced to subtext when we talk about theme or premise or the moral of the story. And a lot of the times it's introduced as there should be a theme to the story, there should be a premise. What are these? So let's look at the story of Robin Hood. The story of Robin Hood, a rendition of the story of Robin Hood could be the ends justify the means, or sometimes justice must be sought outside of the legal system. Those are examples of now those statements, sometimes justice needs to be sought outside the justice system. That one statement summarizes the entire story. So even though that statement is never mentioned in the story or never on the surface level of the story, the entire story works towards supporting and expressing that statement. So a premise can be seen as the subtext. Throughout a story, we're introduced to characters, their actions, things that happen, funny things, sad things, exciting things, and underlying it all is the premise that is slowly being expressed. And it's something that we experience subconsciously. It never appears directly to our conscious mind, but is something that is communicated to us that reaches our subconscious mind. A premise is usually the way it is thought of and the way it is written about is that the premise is like usually thought of as like one statement, and the story you're writing is thought of as sort of like the argument that that statement is true. And a premise needs to be written a certain way and thought about in a certain way. Themes are similar, and yet they're worked with differently. Your story or a movie can have one or many themes, whereas usually there's only one premise to a story. And a theme is not so much a statement of what the writer thinks is true or wants to convey as true, so much as it's just an idea or a concept that is pervasive throughout the story. The ideas and concepts that are being expressed on the surface level are ones that are presented to our conscious. On a subconscious level, there are ideas and concepts that you may not be aware of immediately, and only after a while kind of get the feeling that a work of art is also expressing something under the surface. A premise is basically a story used to argue a point, that such and such is true. Do we need to have a premise in order for it to be a good story? No, not necessarily. Now, people who are passionate about life usually have certain ideas about what is true and not, and this usually becomes driving forces in their stories. So this psychology can lead towards better story writing. But I've never found it useful to sit down and start out by saying, here's the point I want to argue, and then trying to build a story around that. It has never worked that way, and I greatly doubt that it works that way for many writers at all. There are many great works of fiction that really I think that would be a far stretch to say that they have a premise. Catcher in the Rye. Is it arguing a certain point or a certain life view? I think it's sort of a far stretch to say that it does. And yet, one of the main reasons Catcher in the Rye is such a great work of literature is because its theme, its underlying theme. On the surface, it seems like it's, just story, dialogue, but it's what's underlying, it's what isn't said, it's the subtext that makes it such a powerful story. So what is the theme or themes of Catcher in the Rye? A theme could be extreme alienation or a feeling of being orphaned from the way of life that one grew up in. These are underlying themes that are like the rivers of molten lava underneath the ground of the story. There are great stories that have a very definite, strong premise, and also these stories may come off as being more moralistic or preachy or political, like Catch-22. This story, its premise could be that the system makes all good decisions necessarily idiotic. This is an ongoing premise that is interwoven throughout the entire story. So in that story, you could see how the premise is like the backbone of the story. As writers, we need to look for useful ways that we can work with concepts of theme and subtext. For me, I have a text document on my computer. It's titled Heart of the Story, and this is where anything thematic, anything that sort of is an underlying idea or concept in the story, I have it written there, and I don't worry so much if it's a true theme or if it's a true premise, just if it's ideas that can help me write the story better, if it's ideas that can help me unify the story by making it all run along a similar wavelength, a similar sort of vibe, mental vibe. And as long as it's helping me write the story, then I'll use it. And how useful it is to me is what is important, not whether it's could be considered a true theme. As an example, as one of my themes, I could just jot down the word blue, because that one word for me works as a theme. As the creator of the story, that works for me. Do we need to consider theme, and do we need to consider subtext when we're writing fiction? Do we need to think about it? And the answer is no. The fact is that because we are more subconscious than conscious, subtext will appear in your fiction. There is no getting around it. It's naturally occurring. We think of, like Catcher in the Rye. Isn't it amazing that it's written with such a amazing amount of subtext to it? Well, that's just it's a natural phenomena of the way the human mind works. This is just the way the human mind communicates. What happens naturally is that on a conscious level, we are communicating to other people, and yes, storytelling is a form of communication. On a conscious level, we're communicating, and at the same time, our subconscious is also putting in their communications. I'm not saying don't consider subtext. I'm saying for the most part, you can just let it happen, and by being aware of it, we can enhance that in our story and appreciate that, yes, it does have an effect on the reader. All subtext has an effect on the reader, and it does determine how good your story is. Now, the real magic of writing is being able to appreciate how subtext happens when we're writing stories. I'm always amazed at like what happens. So I moved to a new part of town, and all of a sudden in my story there are personality traits of that part of town. There because I moved near a river, and so all of a sudden, there's a lot of what happens in the story takes place around a river, and this happens without me consciously trying to do it. It's just something that it's just our subconscious is operating in our storytelling, and it can be a very powerful thing. And to let it happen, if we're trying to create a great character and we're analyzing it and we're thinking about it consciously, that's great. That's what we need to do. But then our subconsciously, there is someone that we know and we're around quite often, and without knowing it, our subconscious is absorbing everything about it without us even being consciously aware of it. And then when we're creating a character, all of these things that we absorbed from people that we know start to become these fictional characters, and it's so powerful. And to let this happen, as writers, we want to encourage this. We want to, and this is how we become collaborators with our subconscious, and we let it happen. And often what happens is that there's a lot of subtext going on. So there is subtext around us all the time. If you look at commercials geared towards children, often the subtext of these commercials will be, you'll have a lot of friends if you eat this kind of candy, or if you have this new toy. So the subtext of the commercial isn't that this candy is really good or this toy is a great toy. It's that you'll get this additional thing if you get that toy. When I say that writers are explorers and are on a path of discovery, this is what I'm talking about. When you can start shaping your own psychology of the human condition, when you can start experiencing the world and making your own discoveries, this is one of the lines you can go along, is by becoming more and more conscious of the subtext that surrounds you and the subtext that is operating in your fiction writing. Try to appreciate how subtext can take away from the enjoyment of a story for different reasons, and understand that by facing the possibility of that being in your own fiction, you can liberate it and make it something that more people will enjoy more deeply. And you could be working on a great story, but if there's something that could be read as subtext that takes away from that enjoyment, then you don't have the chance to let that great story affect people the way you would like it to. You develop an awareness of subtext, and you develop your own kind of science of how to work with subtext in your story. And over time, with patience, it becomes easy, the same way you gradually become good at typing. When I hear the phrase politically correct, I don't like that phrase, because most of the time when I hear it used, it's in context that subtext, oh, there's subtext going on, not important, shouldn't even pay attention to it. Why are people offended or enjoy the artwork less because of that subtext? Politically correct is where people are reduced to stereotype, and it can be belittling, it can make people feel shut out from other worldviews. It does a lot of things that don't do the work of fiction any favors. And it's further away from the truth. The truth is that in life, every single individual is much more complex than any stereotype. When you have stories where stereotypes start to occur and that sort of thing, it's in that space of us and them. But the phenomena today is that media is so saturated in our culture that in terms of the media sphere, there is no us and them. So that's where these places where our stories could not do themselves a favor by causing lots of people to not give our stories a chance to be enjoyed, simply because we haven't looked at the subtext. What I do when I'm writing my story, if I'm in a creative mode, I pay no attention to subtext. I just let it happen. And then later when I'm editing, this is one of those things you look at later on. you realize that there's something that could be read a certain way, and you could do yourself a favor by changing it around a little bit so that it's read a different way. One of the great things about becoming aware of subtext in your fiction is realizing the truly amazing serendipitous things that happen that we didn't consciously intend. So you can realize that you've written a work of fiction that is inherently very powerful, and it's because of a subtext that appeared. Now, one thing that happens in my writing all the time is that my subconscious wants and desires and fears are apparent in the subtext, and I always go back and I laugh or to realize that written in the story are these things that I was unaware of myself, that were still part of what was going on with me, that showed up in the story. When we're in the creative mode, we're totally non-critical about ourselves, we're totally non-judgmental about what we're writing. We try to get in the moment, we try to get inspired, and it is not the time to care about subtext. It's later when you're going back. If you're going to go back and make your work more readable, you may as well also go back and look at the subtext. The biggest way that I use subtext, this is one of those things where becoming a better artist is just about, becoming more, I guess you could use the term spiritual, becoming, now I use that term very loosely. It's about trying to become a better individual in order to become a better writer, because if the subtext is all about the subconscious, then by trying to be more honest with myself and trying to be more understanding of other individuals and really being able to try to see where they're coming from and trying to have appreciation for the greater society and trying to learn what it means to have a respectful viewpoint of others, and trying to realize that I don't need to be preachy and I don't need to push my views on others. These are spiritual practices that I try to bring to my life, because in the long run I know that it's going to affect my subconscious and conscious, and therefore affect my writing. The quality of your subconscious mind is going to have a huge effect on your writing. So go out there, explore the world, meet different kinds of people, have different experiences, gain knowledge, learn as much as you can, try to understand, become curious in the mystery of the world, and this will change your subconscious, and then the magic can start happening, and then you find yourself being able to create very powerful works of writing. Now there's a saying about writing: if it can be misunderstood, it will be misunderstood. Very similar thing could be said. If it can be taken a certain way, it will be taken a certain way. So appreciate that in writing, people don't just read your writing one way. There are ambiguities. There are different ways of it being read, and that's what is part of the challenge of writing, is appreciating that lines of text aren't just read one way. They can be read a multitude of ways, and by becoming aware of those different ways they can be read, we can make those little changes here and there that could make the difference between your work catching on or not. It's helpful to look a little bit into Freud and appreciate that things that look like one thing on the surface could mean things underneath the surface, and gain an appreciation for why do people dress the way they do. There are many different ways that people use their appearance to get different things, to communicate different things, and it's just such a vast world of underlying subtext. It's really amazing, And it is a challenge, and a side benefit of this is that you could become a little bit like a mind reader. The more that you become tuned in to all the subtext, you can really pick up on things that people say to you without them realizing they're saying it to you, and you can become immune to some of the brainwashing that happens with commercials, and you're really uncovering a vaster reality around you. So subtext is really a wonderful, monstrous thing that is a huge part of everyday life. Subtext does not just happen on a local level. There's subtext that's written into our very language. Now, as generally speaking, you think of Western culture as thinking of things in a general terms as far as being good and bad, whereas generally speaking, Eastern cultures think of things as being complementary opposites, like night and day. And what is written into our very languages, you might, if you go back, you can pick up that the way I have consciously decided to use language is more in an Eastern tradition, where, night and day serve each other. They help each other. One is not inherently good or bad. They both can be good or bad. And, left and right. Left is not necessarily weak. I'm a left-hander myself. Right is not necessarily good. The Eastern way of speaking, as far as what I've been told, as far as what I've learned, I'm not a deep studier of language, is that there are opposites that can be equally thought of as good, or that good and bad is not necessarily part of the equation. And I try to use that in my own language, because I see this as subtext. This is an underlying subtext that I think can improve me as a writer to use these spiritual concepts in my storytelling. The example I just gave you is a discovery I feel like I've made by starting off on the same things that I've given you. That there is a world of subtext, it appears naturally in your writing, and you have the option to become an explorer about what that world is all about, and discover your own, make your own discoveries. It is still a vastly uncharted landscape. You're on the frontier. You have a chance. It's just like someone who's going to go live on Mars for the first time. It's just like, what the people that work at the Large Hadron Collider have the are in the possibility of what might happen every time they plug that thing in and get it running. It's an opportunity for new discovery. J.D. Salinger was a master of subtext, and that's because a lot of what is being said in his stories are not actually being said. They're being implied. They're there, but the reader needs to infer that they're there. They're not in the open, and it's very poetic. It's like he's writing from the gut. When you read the writing, you can tell that there's something else behind it. And we don't see it clearly, and in wondering what exactly it is behind his stories, we gain a knowledge that we may not be able to completely express in words, but for that fact, it's more than what can be expressed in words. And some of us just naturally have subconsciouses that pour a lot more subtext into our work, and others of us can appreciate that and even consciously decide to allow more subtext into our work. All your accumulated knowledge as an individual, your awareness of the world around you, becomes the subtext in your story. The life you are leading in real life. All the factors involved, these often become the subtext in your stories. Your worldview has a drastic influence on the subtext. So one of the best ways to change the subtext in your story is not to go in there and consciously rewrite your story, but to change the way you live in order to change your story. Travel, try to meet different people, read books, expand your world, increase the variety of your world. Live experiences just to enrich your writer's life, and allow your writing. Realize that most of what happens in your writing you're not consciously in control of. You're like this subconscious sponge that wanders around, and you're picking up a lot of things without knowing it. And I like the idea of DNA, but not in a literal sense. You can soak up kind of the DNA of things. You can pick up on their essence and these elements of personality that we may not be able to express on a conscious level, but they are still flavors that can become part of your writing. And just let it happen, and don't try to have conscious control over everything, but realize that it's true that to be a writer, we really do need a lot of experiences. There are many instances when creators use subtext in a conscious way, and there are times when, in commercials, in war propaganda, these are times when, if you look at your average advertisement, it's promising you more than the product. It will promise you popularity and all these other things that we want that don't necessarily have to do with buying goods. And in propaganda, they vilify adversaries. So they're if there is the enemy is reduced to a stereotype of this villain is nothing but a low vermin, numbskull, and nothing more. We take the humanity away from those characters in war propaganda films. And this is subtext because on the surface we're just watching an entertaining movie, but the way that it is being depicted also conveys other information, also conveys attitudes about life and people and places in the world, and even though it doesn't come right out and say it, it tries to get us, the viewers, to see it in that way. And so there are times when you can consciously manipulate the subtext in your story, and now whenever you do that, you're always at a risk as coming off as preachy and or your story kind of loses some of its feeling of sincerity. But subtext itself does not mean brainwashing other people. It's really up to the viewer to have more of a conscious control over what they are viewing. And if your intentions are sincere, if you're just wanting to be a creator and you're not trying to brainwash the masses, then it's very unlikely that your stories will have that element to them. One of the circumstances of Fellini's film, 8.5, is that the protagonist is a movie director, and the events in his life just naturally find their way into his film, with the problem that then people in his personal life look at his work and are offended by, they can read his private thoughts about them. And so basically he's the artist, he's the sponge, and just naturally, no matter what kind of film or work or story an artist is trying to make, real life circumstances are going to have some sway on what happens. The subconscious is churning away about what's going on with the people in our lives, and that sort of brain work kind of burbles up through the swamp material of the subconscious into our conscious creation and has an effect on it. Artists who make the most use of subtext are usually ones who give up a lot of control to the subconscious. They let themselves be like channelers of the subconscious, and the fact is that subconsciously our brains are churning away all the time, and it's a huge part of our life, and yet we're barely conscious of it, and we can never be completely conscious of it. And when we allow more subconscious thought to become interwoven into our conscious thoughts on the page, this makes the more you can do this with your writing, the more your writing resembles what it is actually like inside of our brains. As an exercise, become a searcher for subtext. Maybe keep a journal for a while, looking for subtext in things people tell you. If you can discover a hidden meaning in the things people say, you know, someone could be talking to you about the new train track being built in your town, but you can also detect in the things that they say that they are looking forward to when they, I don't know, they're sad about someone in their family dying, something like that, I don't know. And just try to consciously make an effort to discover more subtext. It's part of human nature not to deal with some things directly. A lot of the times we don't deal with our own mortality, or the fact that we'll all die directly, and sexuality. We do think about it and talk about it directly, but there are a lot of times when it's a matter of putting it in an analogy, or insinuating, or it becoming part of our architecture or our humor, and sickness and ill fortune. For as much as we try to deal with those topics directly and openly, 90% of the time we're dealing with it, thinking about it, communicating about it indirectly and in disguise and in analogy, and it's just the way, I don't know why, maybe because it's the way humans can cope with these things. So this becomes part of the human state of mind, and it's all subtext. It's all thoughts and feelings and attitudes that are hidden away, because that's just the way we deal with life. And that's another reason why subtext is very powerful in writing. If you listen to artists speak or read biographies on artists, one thing that comes up again and again is an artist will talk about how they feel like they've been so exposed. They feel like there's, that the world can look directly, they're concerned. And a big part of this is that when you make a creation, when you write a story, you can't help that but for your most private, hidden attitudes about life and people in your life and in your society and your country, and all of your secret fears and everything, they find their way onto the page. And the thing is not to fight it, but to go with it, to accept yourself as a human being and realize that you're just, that there's no reason why you're going to be kicked out of humanity, and that to realize that these things that make us feel like we need to defend ourselves could be our greatest assets in writing. They could be the things that others would most identify in our writing, and you could be actually like the point where some of these things become part of the conscious dialogue in society, and people can realize kind of the state of the mind of society through your writing. Do we exercise conscious control over subtext? Yes, absolutely. We can do this not in the first draft, not in the second draft, but later on. We do it when we're in the same stage, when we're doing grammar check, when we're going through and finding all the be verbs and seeing if we can replace passive verbs with active verbs. We're doing this when we're doing the last stage corrections, looking for ambiguities in our writing and seeing if we can write more clearly, more directly. And also, so this is a good stage where we go through and we second guess our work. We can say, is our work, can it be read a certain way? And what we're looking for is subtext. We're looking for parts of the work that people might take a certain way. How much effort should we put into subtext? You don't have to. You can choose not to put in any effort at all. There is so much storytelling out there where there has been very little regard for subtext. What I'm saying is that subtext is one of these extremely powerful approaches to writing that, to the extent you can put a little effort into it or you can put a lot of effort into it, and it's like, if you so choose to use it, it's like if you show a computer to someone who's never seen a computer before and you say, here's this incredibly powerful thing that will probably involve a lifetime of learning and, yes, difficulty in learning and in using, but it's just about one of the most powerful tools I can offer you. Let's say you have a friend who lived in a building that burned down. So write an analogy about it. Tell a story about three little grasshoppers who build a raft and go down a river, but then the raft starts falling apart while they're floating down the river, something like that. An analogy, but you're really telling a story about your friend whose house is burned down. Subtext can flourish in common speak. It can be when people are writing very much the way people these days are talking and are used to, can write in a way so that most people in your country can understand you, and they don't need to go to the dictionary, and it's with what you would think of as very readable, very, very easy to read language. Subtext can still flourish there and make it a very rich and layered story. Look at the Godzilla movies. So the Godzilla movies came out after the bombing of Nagasaki and Hiroshima. So these were cities that were devastated, and all of a sudden you have these movies where you have this giant monster lumbering through a city, tearing down buildings, stomping on cars, killing people, crushing things, and the protagonist is not an individual, it's a whole city, it's a whole society, and that protagonist is against this giant uncontrollable monster. Well, that's complete subtext for the atomic bomb devastation on those cities. People who are plagued by manic depression or paranoia, if you happen to be one of those people who have demons, who are really caught up in a very severe life struggle, this can greatly enhance your artwork. Joni Mitchell described her depression as the sand needed to create the pearl. So this is in these states of agitation and great struggle and great severity, difficulty, our subconscious becomes so hyperactive, churning away, and if you're going to get something, you may as well get something out of it. So you may as well use these states to create works of they could, on the surface level, they could be so simple, they could seem like they're about nothing more than a simple little story, but they become so rich in subtext, and when people read it, they feel that. They feel the bottom dropping out. They feel this depth of meaning opening up before them, of subtext, that it's really about something so much more, that it's really involving much greater forces than can be described in, if it's a short story that's only 2 pages long, it may be a very simple short story, but it's actually describing something much more universal, something with much greater impact than what the story appears at first to be about. I could seriously go on for days about subtext. I've gotten to a point where I think I can say, here is the window, this is the point for your own self-discovery. You're going to discover things about subtext that I or no one else has ever discovered. You can devise your own exercises and subjects of research and ways that you can look into it, and your own system of looking at subtext in your own writing, and it's just so wide open to discovery, and there could be books and books and books written on the subject, and there have been books written on the subject in one form or another. It may not be labeled subtext, it could be a book on psychology, it could be a book on sociology, but I challenge you to become an explorer, to become someone who is going to spend their lives learning, increasing your understanding of subtext, and increasing the different approaches you have to using subtext in your writing, and using it to become a better writer each year of your life that you write. So remember, writing is such a complex thing. There is so much to it. There are so many different ways of looking at it that it can be overwhelming. So remember, always cut yourself plenty of slack. Shut down the judger, get creative, and instead of wondering, did I do it wrong, ask yourself, how can I make this a little bit better? Take your time, just do what you can do in the next few seconds, don't worry about the rest, and I hope your writing goes great. Thanks for watching these videos. Please, the best way you can encourage me to make more of these is hit the like button, leave a comment. I'm really very helped along by the comments people have left for me. I read them. To all of you, I appreciate you. I thank you very much. Please subscribe. And also, please take the time to go check out my illustrated, narrated webisodes at solomation.com. It's going to be a 6-book project. You can watch all the completed episodes for free at solomation.com. And I hope your writing goes great, and have a good day.